Good morning, everyone. You are very welcome to the Enabling Wellbeing Environments, Encouraging Local Government Leadership webinar. The panel would be delighted to receive any questions you may have. Please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your PC or laptop screen. If you're using an iPad, you will find this feature located at the top of your screen. Without further ado, I will now hand you over to your host for today, Vinny O'Shea, Healthy Ireland Local Government. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Healthy Ireland Local Government online webinar. It's called Enabling Wellbeing Environments, Encouraging Local Government Leadership. It's the second of our series of 3 webinars in 2024 that we are hosting with regard to community wellbeing. My name is Vinny O'Shea, and I work in the Healthy Ireland Local Government National Office, which is funded by the Department of Health. We are hosted within Waterford City and County Council, and we do have reporting arrangements with the Local Government Management Agency and the City and County Managers Association as well. And I'll be moderating today's webinar. So just to give a very quick outline of the role of the National Office, we support the 2 main health and wellbeing initiatives within local government, the Healthy Ireland Cities and Counties programme and the Sláinte Care Healthy Communities programme, where we encourage local government effort towards improving community health and wellbeing outcomes and addressing health inequalities in some of the most disadvantaged areas of our country. And we also have a European context to our role, working closely with the WHO with their European Healthy Cities Network. And I'm happy to see some international colleagues joining us and attending today's event. And also particularly encouraged to see students from our universities and technological universities attending today to learn more about enabling wellbeing environments. So to give a very quick context to today's webinar, as indicated at the outset, this is the second of our Enabling Wellbeing series, having earlier this year focused on health literacy approaches in communities. And this November, we will be exploring the impact of early intervention and preventative approaches in improving wellbeing outcomes in our communities. So the Enabling Wellbeing framing is appropriate for the webinar series, and in particular for today's theme, given that local government wields significant influence in enabling wellbeing environments. But today's event is also set within the context of central government allocating historical levels of resources, with the largest plethora of dedicated initiatives being given to local government to plan and respond to issues such as climate action, active travel, urban and rural regeneration, integration, and housing construction and supports, all of which contribute towards well-being environments, but yet we might still have difficulties in relation to health inequalities and poor health outcomes. So it might be worth asking why the need to have this webinar, and why would local government leadership ever require encouragement? So we might try and answer that one today. And also I wanted to highlight that the Enabling Wellbeing series rationale is not to highlight what good work or practice is being done in the 31 local authorities. I think we've far too many of these types of events and award schemes that highlight that. This is more to explore the areas of opportunity and look for innovation in our responses, and in trying to deliver better public health and wellbeing outcomes for, and most importantly, with our communities, and to question, can we do more and can we do better, and how can local government lead on this? So we'll be exploring how exactly our environment influences health, and more importantly, how local government actions can influence our environment. In doing this, we wish to generate discussion with stakeholders working across wellbeing and public health, and on why we need to move from interdisciplinary approach of having technical experts and professionals dominating the discourse to a more transdisciplinary approach with an integrated focus on spaces, people, and their contexts. The contributions to today's webinar should provide a strong platform to start exploring context to wellbeing environments, and shift in how local government shapes wellbeing environments from linear and transactional approaches to more enabling approaches taking into consideration local, disaggregated data, cultural insights, and integrated systems thinking. So it's appropriate that Niall Cusson, Chief Executive at the Office of the Planning Regulator, provides the opening contribution this morning, setting the scene on how local government and its planning functions shapes healthy environments, and where current programmes provide enabling potential. Niall will be followed by Dr. Elaine Darcy, who's TU Dublin's Sustainability Action Research and Innovation Lead, and she'll be providing context of the work with local government on active travel and sustainable living and the need for transdisciplinary approaches to public health and wellbeing. We will then hear from Professor Catherine Woods, Director of Physical Activity for the Health Research Centre at University of Limerick, whose research on physical activity environment policy and systems thinking offers great potential for exploration at the local level. The webinar also offers an opportunity to get a clear understanding of One Health, an emerging area for local government, and we're delighted that Professor Tony Holohan, who is Director at the Centre for One Health at UCD, will provide an insight into this area, and he'll be closely followed by Dr. Ciara Fortune, Regional Advisor for Healthy Cities, Health Promotion and Wellbeing at the World Health Organization, and she'll be joining us later on because of commitments with a European Healthy Cities Network meeting earlier, and she'll provide a global context to this work and the important role of local government. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's contributions, and by way of housekeeping, again to repeat from the earlier opening message, the copy of the recording of today's webinar together with speakers' presentations will be available on www.hilocalgov.ie, our website, after today's event. And finally, I would encourage you to participate in today's webinar by using the Q&A function. And if you like or agree with questions being asked, you can indicate by thumbs up, and we will try and weave the most popular questions into the panel discussion, where we have set some additional time this time around for our second webinar. If you are using social media today, we would really love to see your insights at hashtag Healthy Ireland Local Government and hashtag Enabling Wellbeing Environments. So without further ado, I will gladly hand you over to Niall Cusson from the Office of the Planning Regulator to set the scene for us in enabling wellbeing environments and the role of spatial planning. So Niall, I will leave it with you and can afford you some time to share your screen and begin your presentation.
That's great, Vinny. Hope everybody can hear me. And for those dialing in from Ireland, I hope everybody got through the storm safe and sound yesterday. I'm just going to check there that the slides are going through.
We can see your slides, Niall. Just to move them, if you go to the bottom left-hand corner, there might be an arrow to move them. Yeah, now, Niall, there they go. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Very good. Yeah, just to kick off, again, thanks to Vinny and Healthy Ireland team for the invitation to be with you this morning. It's a topic that's very close to my heart, and it's great to see the engagement between the health and the local government sectors through this initiative in building up awareness in the local government sector around the fantastic role it has played and needs to play even more into the future in relation to enabling well-being environments. When Vinny contacted me about participating in today's webinar, it struck me that it was a timely approach given the historical background to what our planning process came from and perhaps what it's rediscovering today. And whilst many historical civilizations practiced advanced planning and architectural approaches going back thousands of years, such as the image from Siena in Italy to the top left there, it was the 19th century industrial revolution that gave rise to much of what we now know as our planning process. And it was one that was intrinsically linked to a rapidly developing scientific understanding of public health and the links between a healthy environment and a healthy society. The segregation of noisy and polluting workplaces from residential areas, public sanitation, parks, and architectural master planning of new communities, such as in the Ebenezer Howard's Garden City movement, the placing of the common good over an unfettered capitalist-centred approach were the historical drivers of what we know as our planning process today. And the image in the top right there is from Ebenezer Howard's Garden City report. And it's therefore no coincidence that here in Ireland, the origins of much of our modern health service came from a local government system that was historically responsible for improving public health through healthcare infrastructure, sanitation, and so on. And over time, it became responsible for town and regional planning, as it was called, First Planning Act going back to 1934. But since then, it's evolved into quite a procedural and two-dimensional approach, centered on the preparation of spatial plans, allocating distinct categories of land use into zoning objectives, which in the context of wider objectives and policies provide a basis for decision-making on specific planning applications for permission to carry out physical development, which the 31 planning authorities across the country process over 30,000 of every year, approving most of them, about 84% every year. But since 2015, this rather two-dimensional procedural and at times reactive system has been going through significant reform. And I'm going to kind of go through that in just a minute. Next slide there, yeah. So whilst we're very privileged to live in a strong and prosperous country within a stable political and security context, we also face many challenges in ensuring the progress we are making and have made is sustainable. And many of these are highly relevant to planning and wellness, even aspects of same. The graphics here from the recently published EPA State of the Environment Report 2024 illustrate both great strengths in terms of the explosion in the numbers of people at work and our exports since EU accession, but also the energy and emissions intensity of our way of living and moving. You see there on the left, the jump from just under 500,000 cars in 1973 to nearly 3 million today. And while the car offers us mobility and freedom, it is also having a profound effect on our physical environment and activity levels and our health. So into all of this complicated context comes the planning process, which of course just recently has seen the passing of the Planning Act 2024. President signed it last week, I understand. And what's the most recognisable impression that many members of the public will have of planning in Ireland is making or commenting on planning applications. As many of the people in here on the call will realise, the planning process has far-reaching and profound roles and responsibilities. Indeed, at the core of the legislative, regulatory and policy framework for planning in Ireland is the concept of proper planning and sustainable development, which is fundamentally about wellness or healthiness of place, be that urban, be it rural, and in respect of all the relevant environmental, social, and economic aspects of that. So proper planning and sustainable development is about providing for the sustainable development and regeneration as necessary of our communities for the common good, securing economic development in a balanced manner, nationally, regionally, locally, and as regards urban and rural areas, ensuring the provision of the right forms of housing in the right places at the right times as our communities require, managing and enhancing our places in the long-term interests of our communities, and above all, protecting our environment, including both addressing the causes of and effects of climate change and looking after and conserving our natural and built habitat. The graphic here, I suppose, just illustrates the broad shape of the planning system. At the heart of it is the 31 local authorities preparing their spatial plans, their city and county development plans for their own areas, informed by a wider context on the left there of the EU directives, various different national legislation, ministerial guidelines, and so on, and obviously taking account of their wider functions in relation to housing, economic development and other functions, capital programs, etc. on the right. So when I also think of the phrase proper planning and sustainable development, I think about healthiness and wellness and all of that. Another phrase that springs to mind immediately is placemaking, which probably more than any other defines the purpose of planning. And it is about enabling the evolution of better, more attractive, more cohesive places for communities to enjoy. Places that are healthy and that will lead to healthy communities based on a quality of life, which means compact settlements, walkable settlements, cyclable settlements and communities. Less cars, more community facilities and amenities, more greenery, more nature at the heart of our lives. And exposure to nature, we all know, is known as a powerful influence on wellness, and excellent civic design and spatial planning can bring both urbanity and naturalness together. And these images here are from, I suppose, different parts of the local government system where this work of taking damaged or hidden places, backlands and so on, are progressing in terms of striking out new visions, and then through engagement and interaction with all the relevant stakeholders, trying to bring about the implementation of that vision over time. Indeed, this graphic here is a timely reminder of what the planning process can achieve, and indeed did achieve over my professional and lived lifetime working in and around the city here, depicting Sheriff Street in the depressed times of the late 1970s. And today, a quarter of the city with over 20,000 people living, 30,000 people working in it, with new transport, waterfront, amenity infrastructure. Didn't, as I've often said before, on this particular example, didn't happen by accident. It happened because there was a plan in relation to transformation. And that's not to say that planning is not without future challenges. Many people here on the call can think of places that have potential and haven't realised that. But I suppose that's what we're going to discuss later on. Now, local authority leadership is already very, very strong in this space. There's lots of examples here. I won't go into them in much detail, but from I suppose the whole new Passive House centred, public transport centred development in Shangana by the Land Development Agency, renewal in Waterford, greenways in the Midlands, economic and cultural hubs in the border counties, infill housing developments, mixed use cultural and residential developments in Limerick. There are literally hundreds of examples where the actual practice of local authorities and local authority staff on a day-to-day basis are delivering much more well-being centred, much more sustainably centred forms of development right across the country. And so local authority leadership in terms of place, wellness and town centre first, is another good example of what we're discussing today. Indeed, springing from the pioneering work, I have to acknowledge it, of the Heritage Council in its Town Centre Health Check initiative. The Town Centre First programme is leading to huge initiatives right across the country. I just want to briefly mention it as an example of what we're talking about today. And for these next slides, I must also credit my colleague Mairead Hunt, National Town Centre First Coordinator. I'm sure it may be known to many on the call. And Town Centre First is another key and innovative example of LA leadership or local authority leadership in wellness. And I think, as Vinny kind of alluded to, it's providing both mechanisms on funding to support bottom-up actions to improve our towns and cities, very much focused around citizen-centred and engaged design, founded on evidence-based decision-making and backed by funding to ensure delivery and confidence by citizens in the connection between their ideas and ultimately delivery on the ground. The launch of the recent In-Place report by the International Centre for Local Regional Development, ICLRD, part-funded by the OPR, Mairead took us through some of the excellent examples of Town Centre First initiatives in train around the country. This example from Roscrea in County Tipperary particularly caught my eye. And as indeed many on the call, I'm sure, would be well aware, many public realm projects can be contentious around the country because of a sense of less accessibility by cars to businesses and services. And sometimes that can arise because of maybe overly a top-down approach. But as I understand it, this particular Town Centre First initiative took a slightly different approach, starting by surveying citizens on what their impressions were in the split between the urban realm dedicated to the pedestrian, and particularly maybe vulnerable or less, I suppose, mobile citizens, and the amount of space dedicated by the car, and the split being effectively 80-20 there in the image. And that was such a shock to local people in the area. It very much was a drive for probably the design and the urban realm intervention going much, much further in creating walkable, much more accessible and a much more greened environment that hopefully we will see implementation of in the near future. You have the sense of it from the image you can see above. And similarly, in terms of active travel, area-based transport assessment, local transport plans, there's a whole revolution of new thinking underway, supported by our colleagues from the National Transport Authority, Transport Infrastructure Ireland, the local authorities working in concert And from the work of the Office of the Planning Regulator, we're very much keen on seeing that whole approach embedded in the new generation of local area plans that are popping up across the country, and indeed will take even further shape in terms of the new generation of different types of area plans envisaged under the Planning and Development Act 2024. And these are images from different local area plans that have been evolved in the context of the advices from the NTA around area-based transport planning, local transport plans that are informed by, I suppose, wider objectives around sustainability, active travel, diversifying our modal mix, and trying to create, again, a more sustainable future. And of course, because I'm thinking about local authority roles in wellness, it is all about connections and creating virtuous, self-reinforcing cycles, which indeed is recognised in the European Green Deal graphic above, also from the EPA State of the Environment report 2024. Quite a lengthy report, but if you do get a chance to have a go through it, there are lots of pearls of wisdom in it in terms of the challenges that we have to address out into the future. And I heard Vinny mention One Health, and I think we're going to hear Dr. Tony Holan later on. But again, I suppose demonstrating here in the graphic the huge interactions between, I suppose, health in our various different environments, our physical environment, that feeding into our own human health and indeed other sort of health sectors as well. Right. So when I was preparing for this, Vinny was saying also maybe highlight some of the challenges that we face, and maybe where we're getting it maybe not so right, and some of the challenges we might have to address more through local authority leadership in relation to wellness. And a graphic that I didn't just have a minute to focus on earlier on in the presentation was the one there on the top left. And again, it's from our friends in the EPA's State of the Environment Report 2024. And thanks to Andy Fanning and co for that. But illustrating, I suppose, the European Union per capita emissions in 2022, about 5.5 tons per person. In the US, which we definitely wouldn't hold up as a poster child in relation to emissions, average per capita 13.5 tons. And we're not too far off that at 10.4. So we have a particularly energy intensive, mobility demanding form of development, which we're going to have to grapple with. So the image on the right is in relation to, I suppose, housing construction in and around Galway and its environs. And you'll hear lots of commentary around housing targets and whether we're reaching our housing targets and whether the housing targets should be different and so on. And government will pronounce on that very, very shortly. But our national planning framework, which is the sort of, I suppose, overarching framework that guides our spatial plans at regional and local level, identifies a housing requirement that we should be meeting in and around Galway City, the city and its immediate environs, the built-up area of the city, of around 1,000 homes a year. We're building about 200 or thereabouts within the city. But we are building, I suppose, a much larger amount of housing in the wider region around Galway. And you can imagine all of the travel, all of the emissions, the individual heating systems, the individual on-site wastewater treatment systems going into groundwater at a time when groundwater is at ever higher levels during winter, climatic events, rainfall events, and so on. And I suppose the message being that this isn't really taking us to a wellness nirvana, but something very, very different. And it is time for leadership at a whole realm of levels, political and institutional, to turn that around. So the message is clear. While local authorities have traditionally been in the hard infrastructure space and are still to a degree, in relation to the local transport functions, roads functions, I suppose they were in water, they're out of that, they were in waste, they're out of that now. I suppose our purpose and our mission, if we're open to accepting it, is very, very different now in the local government sector. Indeed, when you look at, I suppose, the whole raft of material that is now published in relation to wellness, sustainability, and so on, wellness of communities and their places is absolutely key to our sustainable future. And as well as that, as well as pressing climate, biodiversity, and competitiveness challenges. The successful places into the future are going to be the ones that people want to live in and visit, and that's down to quality and sustainability. Now, much of the local government sector, of course, is already all over this. But where it isn't, it's going to lose out. It's going to be left behind. So a huge part of this is going to be events and activities, training, awareness building, and again, credit to Healthy Ireland and Vinny for the work that's going into this, in creating a better understanding in our minds of the connections that are there between place, our environment, health, wellness, and so on. Making the connections also is probably going to mean taking on some vested interests. And again, the key to that is awareness, evidence, and knowledge, so that we really take on these challenges into the future. And training is going to be absolutely crucial in relation to this. And indeed, pictured here are images from a whole range of inspirational projects championed by leaders in the local government sector across the country. In some cases, who have battled to make some of these projects a reality in the teeth of a lot of institutional, financial, operational, and other challenges. So I suppose the key question for a lot of people listening in today, what are you going to add to these out into the future? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niall, for a very insightful input on planning for healthier environments, and in particular your considerations in the final slide and your comments and the question you asked the audience. I think it gives plenty of food for thought and for some potentially really interesting questions in the discussion. So thank you. Can I now invite Dr. Lorraine Darcy, Technological University of Dublin's lead on sustainability, action research and innovation, to give us her input. So I had the pleasure of meeting Lorraine at the recent HEPA conference in Dublin, and immediately felt that Lorraine's thinking had to be put before you at today's webinar. So Lorraine, welcome, and I'd really be interested again in hearing your thoughts. So could you please begin your presentation at your convenience?
Thanks, Vinny, and thanks very much to everyone for inviting me to be along today and to be part of this really important discussion. As we, as Niall mentioned there, that we are in a state of flux actually in relation to a lot of policy, a lot of structures and working, practices and norms. And I think this is a wonderful time and a wonderful opportunity for us to have a discussion around this. I always have to introduce myself from a particular context, depending on what room I'm talking to. But just to give an overview of my role, and let me see now, if I can move the screen.
If you just move the arrow down to the
there we
left.
go. Yep. Did it work?
Yeah, it did. Sorry, Lorraine. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Jean. I describe myself as a transdisciplinary pracademic and systems thinker. And I often have to introduce myself differently depending on the room, which I just said. And to give you some context, just where I've come from on this, I'm an engineer. I worked as a transport planner, transport engineer. And then I took the jump across to working in children's sport, which was a kind of a voluntary passion of mine at the time. And really, what happened there was that I suddenly realized that I was there talking and representing the built environment in the health and physical activity and wellbeing room. And then I had the opportunity to study with Catherine Woods, who was up next, to do my PhD work on essentially exercise and environmental psychology. So what is it about the environment? How do we respond to that? And how do we behave as a result? And what this did was it opened up a whole conversation. and an opportunity to work in the horizontal, which Tony will mention later. That what I find is, in particularly in academia, we have these deep silos of knowledge, and in our local authority structures similarly. But the reality is that we need people that can actually talk across the horizontal and represent in different rooms, because there's a lot of language differences between organizations and different metrics by which we are judged, which I will mention again in a minute as well. I'm mostly known for talking about walking. Particularly in a transport context, I'm just known as the walking person. But the reason I speak about the environment through walking is that that's the scale at which we experience the world as humans. It is when we're standing in a space or when we're slowly moving through at a walking pace. That's the most human scale and human pace in which we experience the world. But and then just context of my role in TU Dublin, that I work in our sustainability office with the Vice Presidents for Sustainability. And we are essentially using our university as a living lab, and using the quadruple helix model, where we engage with industry around their needs. We engage with government in relation to policy, whether it's advising or feeding into those conversations. We work with society and our communities around, not only our university community, but also the communities around our campuses, which in TU Dublin's case, were like 3 very different contexts, but also a lot of variety in relation to socioeconomics as well. And then using our own resources within the university to transfer knowledge and to knowledge generation. In TU Dublin, we're wonderfully placed across 3 local authorities in Dublin, which also brings a little bit of diversity to the conversations that we're having. And I suppose this is something where the TUs around the country, we're all kind of developing this structure because it's something we all have in common. And yeah, I have the sign that, yeah, sorry, I'll come back to that in a minute. So to kind of come back to something that Niall said there is in relation to planning policy. That is and same with transport policy and a number of different policies. That, over time they became a little siloed, and, the metrics by which they developed became quite disconnected from everything else. So here we can see in the bottom we have that well-connected traditional neighborhood, typical of what was built before the 1940s, where you have your social interactions, you have your your food environments are very natural, like small shops, etc. But also housing was very close to the destinations. Whereas the model that we followed there for a while, what we can see on the top is that we had a segregated planning, which meant that people didn't while they all lived together, they often have to hop into a car then to drive to school because the distances were prohibitive, and often you having to go onto a main road which people perceive to be dangerous. But we are moving back towards that more integrated structure around neighborhoods, which is really wonderful. And like the town centres for us being a kind of a key example of that, but also greater conversations around how we move in our neighborhoods in relation to transport. And just to show that these 2 schools are within kind of the same as the crow flies distance, but how the structures dictate how people might move. And I talk about things in relation to the village, and this could be in an urban or a rural context, because what people want is a distinct community where you can meet all your needs on foot, so you don't have any burden on you to own any vehicle, but to facilitate so it has somewhere to go for a walk for recreation, but also good public transport, because that is a key connector between communities, and opportunities for social interaction where people have a sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging and that sense of community is a very important piece of the picture in relation to good well-being in our communities. And I always have to put up this reminder, and it's interesting that when I'm not speaking in a health room, when I'm speaking in a different room, that when I put up this slide in relation to the definition of health, how there isn't an awareness as such around that it is not just the physical health, but it is also the mental health and the social well-being. And I don't think that has always been considered in a lot of the structural environment disciplines within local authorities. And I think for me, one of the key things that inhibits collaboration is actually the different metrics of success that different disciplines are judged upon and are under, and the KPIs that are written into their development plans or into the policies in which they are working towards. So we do need that horizontal view of how these can be brought together and people can work collaboratively on them. And just for example, in relation to transport, for years we measured success in the delivery of a transport system around time. Time was the core metric. And what that resulted in is we had environments like this where, it was on movement was the priority because that was the time metric. It was like, you'll get there 10 minutes faster. Now, it never really talked about how, over time that you were going to get stuck in more traffic because these kind of systems induce traffic. But here, a well-intentioned engineer put in good public lighting, flat footpaths, cycle lanes, with the best of intentions, they thought they were providing well for active travel. But what we know is that these are not very comfortable environments for people unless you are, a confident cyclist or that you're walking in a group or you feel safe. And here's another example of a well-meaning scheme, put in with a good cycle path and footpath, but really not really giving consideration to the context and the environment around and how someone may or may not feel safe in that context. And what we've ended up with as a result of that is that this is, I love Professor Ian Walker calls it motor normativity. We view we have a lens of which we see the world through the eyes of the vehicle or through a windscreen view of the world, where we prioritize that. And now we have an awful lot of work to do to come back from that. But what has come with that is actually a social norm and expectancy around, media conversations which focus upon the car driver being at the center rather than the people on foot. And there's invested interest there, and that needs to be considered. So once upon a time, we all lived in these villages, as I mentioned, but now we have them sliced up, which in turn actually really affects people's social connections within their neighborhoods. And this is a study from Bristol, which was a replication of a famous study that was done in San Francisco in the 1980s. And what you can see here is that the lighter the traffic in a neighborhood, the more acquaintances people have in their, within their neighborhoods. And the higher the traffic, the less people that they know. And, considering we appreciate that loneliness is a major issue in Ireland right now, and how this kind of feeds into that. But at the same point in time, when people try to reduce traffic in neighborhoods, we get met with a very aggressive opposition, particularly in the public realm or in the public sector. Interestingly, I want to draw your attention to this very briefly, that Keane Ginty of irishcycle.com did an analysis post the last local elections, where he looked at the councillors that were willing to put themselves forward and stand up for active travel projects, unlike the Living Streets projects in Dún Laoghaire. And what he found was that there was a correlation in success in relation to those that were willing to put themselves out there and support projects like this, which I think is an interesting thing for our public representatives to know. Another example that I like to give is in the evaluation that my colleague Sarah Rock led here in TU Dublin in relation to the coastal mobility route in Dún Laoghaire and the Blackrock Main Street regeneration scheme that was done over the COVID period, is that, the fact that the local authority were willing to be the front face of the project took the pressure off the public representatives, and they were able to kind of go, well, look, the engineers are out there, you can have a chat to them and they will engage with you. And it meant that local representatives didn't have to take a binary public view and stance at the very start of a project, which was contributable to the success of the project and how it was perceived. So a key challenge in us all working together for change is that first of all, we have to realize the co-benefits, because a lot of times there is unintended consequences of well-meaning decisions within when we're working within our silos, and that we don't always realize that these are issues. The one that came up recently, because I'm working with an air quality team on one of our projects, and one of the postdoctoral researchers that was working with us was giving out about sexist tree planting. And this was news to me. And basically what she was saying was that, the people in waste management, parks and services, parks and recreation, were planting male trees so that they wouldn't have to clean up the fruit. But as a result, there was more pollen in the air because the male trees were still putting it out there and worsening air pollution. So, sometimes we don't always think about these things. But what we need is some effective transdisciplinary teams with that breadth and depth of knowledge, as we mentioned, the horizontal as well as the deep, and respecting that, because sometimes people can get, well, you don't know as much as me. And then, talking about what and how do we evaluate? And often when I put up this slide, interestingly, in a project recently with that air quality project, when we said we were going to look at air quality in relation to active travel project, we got met with a lot of, but why? So just being able to communicate that and making sure the community buy in on this project. And just to mention that we're really happy to be working with the Office of Planning and Regulator on that project. And it's very difficult to communicate the invisible. people, react to what they can see and what they can respond to. So if they think, well, you're blocking off the road in front of my house and I'm going to be inconvenienced, it goes from that global view of we want a better world to right now you're inconveniencing me. And but also then how do we communicate what this means? And we have to provide places where people feel comfortable, that they can meet other people and that they have a purpose in their day. And again, factoring that into how we look at things, because otherwise we're going to be left with chronic stress in our environments. I'm going to move on a little. I'm sure this is something that Catherine may speak to in a minute, but just to say that, like, when we're talking about, again, coming back to walking and people's needs within their neighborhoods, that it is the physical characteristics, it's the social characteristics, the land use characteristics, and a lot of that comes from planning, local area development plans, and other interactions. And then we have a lot of the behavioral side and perceptions, which kind of can fall on the the other local authority teams, community and wellbeing, and HSE, etc. Now, just to say, in the mapping exercise that we did around the different departments and silos, it was very stark to us, because it was something I knew, but it was only when we graphed it that it was really evident, is that health is the one kind of government department which is not integrated fully into the local authority system, that it sits on its own outside. And I think that we need to have more conversations within the local authorities, and it's particularly when the geographies don't match, the geographical areas are different. And just to say, not just in the case of automobiles, but it's it's more easily understood and satisfies the needs of a car in the system rather than the people, and particularly the decision makers, as I mentioned to earlier. And finally, I'm just going to finish up on this, is the need for us to consider intersectionality. That there is a lot of cultural differences within our cities, as we have to think about not a minority, women, 51% of our population, and in relation to their needs around the built environment, because there was a gender bias in how we did approach planning and transport for a very long time in a lot of our services, because it was men working in these organizations and they came at it with a particular lens. And no, that was it. I was just going to make mention to the fact that we have experience in delivering. This is the crawl project we're working on with the Office of the Planning Regulator, where we're bringing together the different local authorities and sectors within the local authorities to look at our campuses and using that as a test bed. Okay, thanks very much.
Lorraine, thank you very much for your excellent contribution. Really, really impressed with the village concepts, and your people, place and purpose really feeds into the agenda that we're working within Healthy Ireland local government. Placemaking, Niall would have mentioned it. So the use of the Place Standard tool as a way of engaging communities to have that bottom-up transdisciplinary approach as well, that we're meeting the professionals and the experts with a very informed context of lived experience, I think is really important. Really loved your horizontal integration piece, and I think that's going to give rise to a lot of activity on the Q&A function. So thank you. So
Okay.
moving swiftly on with a nice natural progression from Lorraine, as she indicated, we have Professor Catherine Woods, who's Director of the Physical Activity for Health Research Centre at the University of Limerick, and she's going to provide detail of our work on looking at physical activity environment and the policy discourse, and how collective collaborative action can lead to good wellbeing environments. So Catherine, thanks for your participation today, and you can begin whenever you are ready, please, with your presentation.
Thank you, Vinny. And can I just check that you can see my slides there, that everything is okay?
Absolutely perfect, Catherine.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vinny, and the team for inviting me to speak here today. And I'm going to take a slightly different lens. I'm going to really challenge your audience in relation to cross-sectoral collaboration when it comes to enhancing well-being environments, and particularly asking them to consider the role of leadership, particularly local government leadership in this respect. My name is Catherine Woods. I'm Professor of Physical Activity for Health at the University of Limerick, and I lead a research centre there, which is consisting of multiple disciplines, looking at everything from, providing physical literacy opportunities for young children right up to older adults and those living with chronic disease, for example, looking at school setting, looking at built environment planning, looking at the different sectors or different domains, as we refer to them, within which we can promote physical activity. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of your time today and talk to you about why cross-sectoral collaboration is essential if you want to achieve real change for better, more sustainable wellbeing environments in Ireland. And over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenge, give a potential solution and methods on how to achieve this. And I'm going to use physical activity as a case exemplar, if I may, because that's my area of expertise. So physical inactivity is not an Irish problem, it's a global challenge. And here you have the WHO's Global Action Plan on Physical Activity from 2018 to 2030. And they were looking at reducing population levels of inactivity. That means not meeting national physical activity guidelines. And these are guidelines to protect your current health and also prevent illness in the future. And they wanted to reduce by 10% globally by 2025 and 15% by 2030. And for this, they said, it's not a case of a program, it's not the case of an environmental design, it's a systems approach that we need. And within the Be Active, they have 4 key criteria for the systems: create here active societies, which has got to do with, as Lorraine mentioned, being aware of the co-benefits that, for example, physical activity can have; create active citizen systems, which is to do with leadership and governance; create active people, which is to do with programs; and then create active environments, which is to do with our built and natural environments. In Ireland, unfortunately, we're no different. We have about 54% of our adult population not meeting our own national physical activity guidelines. And when it comes to children and young people, we have about 83%, again, not meeting national physical activity guidelines for their age, their gender. This is not unusual. Ireland is not unusual. This is replicated throughout the globe. It is a challenge. And going back to the World Health Organization's Global Action Plan on Physical Activity, if we want this relative reduction, it can be linked in non-communicable diseases, it can be linked to physical activity and also to the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But to get here, we need a multifaceted response, including local government action. And I think this is where you guys come in. Local government action is essential if we're going to achieve that WHO target. We can document very good progress at country levels regarding the introduction of national policies. For example, in Ireland, we have the National Physical Activity Plan and so on. But we have minimal progress on addressing population levels of physical inactivity locally. Why is this? Well, we believe, or I believe in the research I'm involved in, we believe that it's in part due to a lack of upstream policy progress in domains known to be effective in addressing population levels of inactivity. And I'll explain a little bit about that later on. Also, in part, it's due to a lack of effective infrastructure support for policy implementation. When I use the word infrastructure support there, I'm talking about the infrastructure that supports policies as opposed to built environment. And therefore, we are unlikely to reach the WHO target if the system or the environment remains unchanged, despite our best downstream or programmatic efforts. So effective policy intervention is essential. I'm going to take the next few minutes to go through that in detail. But just to recap, and here's a photograph, and it's really speaking to this. We're unlikely to reach the WHO target, reducing that inactivity level, if the system or the environment remains unchanged despite our best downstream or programmatic efforts. In other words, we can teach as many people as we wish to swim. We can put in place things that will pull people out of the water. But if we do not address the environmental challenges upstream, and if we do not put in place the policy or the enabling context to allow those environmental and program interventions happen, we will not reach or are unlikely to reach our targets, because policy is about changing the system instead of individuals. And in doing so, creating supportive context within which direct and indirect influence can happen on physical activity. So how do we do this? Well, in Ireland, and I'm sure some of these are outdated, you know this landscape much better than me, we have multiple national and local policies in Ireland that either support physical activity directly or indirectly. In actual fact, in our last count, we had at least 18 national policies with many, many more at the local context, all with a direct or indirect remit for promoting physical activity. But the challenge is complex. And the reason for this is, it's not that we're all sitting back and doing nothing. In actual fact, we're more busier than we've ever been. We're working very hard, but it's possibly how we're working and what way we're working. This is from the National Implementation Research Network, and it says that if we don't know what each other is doing in our own departments and across departments, we may run or organize ourselves in a way that will lead to disorder and confusion in terms of the impact. Or we might be working in our own silos and keeping very busy and delivering on our deliverables and milestones, but with individual impact in isolation. Where we really need to get to is where, using cross-sectoral approaches, we ideally row in the same direction, even if we are, in some respects in this one, isolated. It's a coordinated impact because we have alignment. But this is where we really, really need to get to. Collective impact with collaborative action. And over the last number of years, and Lorraine is involved in this research, we set up the Irish Physical Activity Research Collaboration, or IPARC for short. And we use this formula for success. And this is what we're really trying to achieve here, because our challenge is massive. We want to increase population levels of physical activity. And we know that these things on their own are effective. In other words, if we develop programs and we have evidence-based programs that are available to us, that is one concept that we can use to enhance population levels of physical activity. Another one is effective implementation. In other words, you take an evidence-based program and you know how to adapt or tailor it so that it fits into multiple different contexts, but the key ingredients, the magic ingredients that make it effective, remain in place. So you do not dilute the impact of that program when you implement it at scale in multiple locations. An enabling context is something that allows these effective interventions and effective implementation of these interventions happen continually and long term. Now, the relationship between these is not additive, it is multiplicative. In other words, exponential. So if we're really serious about enhancing population levels of physical activity, we need effective interventions to be effectively implemented within enabling contexts. And then we are much more likely to reach the goal of enhancing population levels of change. And this is what we're speaking about today, where you need multiple agendas and one common goal. And that requires cross-sectoral collaboration. So if the cross-sectoral collaboration is going to work for physical activity, you need health to know my agenda is non-communicable disease prevention. You need transport to know my agenda is getting people safely and efficiently through different transport systems. If it's planning, I want people to have healthy environments, enjoyable, natural, well-being promoting environments. What about sport? What about education? What about the workplace? And so on. So these are all multiple agendas, but one common goal is we do this through increasing minutes of physical activity, be that walking, cycling, playing sport, whatever form of physical activity. How do we do this? So we have the challenge, we have the solution, but how do we make this work in practice? It's not easy. And one of the ways we make it or try to make it work in practice is we continually monitor. We monitor the policies around the enabling contexts to see how well our different sectors are working collaboratively to achieve change. And this fits into the policy cycle that you can see here. And on the right and the left, you have two existing policy monitoring tools. One is around auditing what public sector policies exist, with a remit to directly or indirectly promote physical activity. And over here is the monitoring fact sheets run by the WHO. And these two policy monitoring tools speak to the formulation of policies and the decision-making process about what we implement in those policies. However, what we're missing is, to what extent are the public sector policies that we already have agreed and formulated and put in place being implemented? And how do these compare to local, national, and/or international standards? This was a research question that myself and 28 other research centres across Europe sought to address under the Policy Evaluation Network. And one of the deliverables on this was to really advance the field of policy benchmarking, assessment, monitoring, and so on in relation to physical activity in this respect. So we developed something called the Physical Activity Environment Policy Index. And the reason for this is that it is a tool for evaluation and benchmarking of the implementation of public policies to promote physical activity and create healthy physical activity environments. And the PAEPI can help policymakers to determine where their country or county is now in relation to the implementation of physical activity policies, but more importantly, what's possible to change. Provide pathways on how to reach goals to address critical implementation gaps that have been identified, and provide a mechanism for documenting progress. So this is the PAEPI framework here. And what you have is you have an index, which is the Healthy Physical Activity Environment Policy Index. And that's what you want. You want your region, your area, your county, your local government to have a healthy physical activity environment policy index. Now, there are two components: the policies themselves and the infrastructure support that underpins the implementation of those policies. And in policies, you have 8 domains. Now, these domains are known to be effective in the promotion of physical activity at population levels. So we need good physical education in schools. We need good transport design that promotes physical activity, urban design, healthcare, public education, and so on. And then in the infrastructure support domains, there are 7 domains under which infrastructure is needed to be demonstrated in terms of leadership, governance, monitoring and intelligence, funding resources, and so on. And within this framework, there are 45 good practices. And these good practices are indicators of ideal good practice in each of these domains in relation to the promotion of physical activity. So for what that means is, in education, you have 4 good practice statements. In transport, you have 3, urban design 2, and so on and so forth. And what this allows us to do in implementing or using the PAEPI framework is to document evidence of implementation of good practice public policies in each of these domains. This is the 45 good practice statements. And what I'll just give you an example of 2, just to give you an idea. In the policy domain here in transport, what your ideal good practice in this area is that there are public policies to promote and support active mobility for people of all ages and abilities. And Transport 01, good practice statement 01, says there are regulations in place that provide a variety of infrastructures to support safe walking and/or cycling and/or wheeling, including measures to calm speed, reduce vehicular traffic, and enhance activity. And the idea of the PAEPI is that you have to show evidence of implementation of policy actions that allow an independent panel to adjudicate this as low, medium, or high level of implementation status. In terms of infrastructure support, you have one there under leadership, talking to political leadership, and that there is strong, visible political support, and so on and so forth. And at the end, you have your evidence document. In Ireland, the evidence document was 176 pages, published in 2022. And this is you can't see it, it's too small, but the implementation scorecard for Ireland shows that our implementation across the policy domains and the infrastructure to support Spain ranges from low to medium. We have no high and we have one indicator on no or little. And then we have recommendations. So to conclude, the formula for success is we have multiple agendas, one common goal. We require cross-sectoral collaboration for physical activity promotion. And that is the way that we're going to generate this collaborative action. So we need a clear consensus on that physical activities of challenges is vital. We need a commitment to achieve multi-sectoral collective collaborative action to avoid disorder, confusion, and impact and isolation. We need a clear understanding of how an enabling context augments exponentially the programs and environmental changes we seek to put in place. And we need to develop a repository of exemplars of policy action that are important, accessible, feasible, and required. So thank you all very much. Just to acknowledge the research team and the research team members. And then if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Catherine. And I should have referred earlier to the great work that's been done by you and your colleagues within IPARC, the research collaboration, which highlights that transdisciplinary thinking that's required to generate sustainable wellbeing environments. Really struck by the system needs to change, which is obvious, but the disorder and confusion piece within that slide, I think a lot of us are in that place on a Monday morning in particular. So you're after giving and generating a level of direction and guidance, and the work you've done with the physical activity index is maybe somewhere where we can be following suit in relation to the work that you're doing. So thank you very much. And I know you're going to get a lot of questions based on your presentation. I now want to introduce to you Professor Tony Holohan, Director at the Centre for One Health at UCD. So this UCD One Health Centre is dedicated to advancing research, education and collaboration on the One Health approach to solving global health challenges. So One Health recognises the interconnectedness of human, animal and planetary health. And I was happy to see firsthand Tony's commitment to One Health when he was contributing at the Wellbeing Economy Conference in Trinity College in Dublin earlier on this year. I was really delighted when you agreed to participate in today's webinar. So, Tony, if you'd like to give us your insights on One Health and its relevance for local government and for us all, please.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Vinny. I'm not half as excited as I am, so thank you. So good morning, everybody. My name is Tony Holohan, and I'm Director of the Centre for One Health, as Vinny has said, in UCD. But as many of you know, I've spent most of my career in public health, particularly working in government as Chief Medical Officer for Ireland for 14 years, from 2008 until 2022. And I now have more time and energy than I could in my former role to spend time thinking about health and well-being in the wider contexts of ongoing global events like the climate emergency, energy and water distribution, biodiversity loss, conflict and migration. And that's why I'm so excited to have been appointed as the director of the centre, which we established in February of this year. And I want to thank you, Vinny, and your colleagues for the invitation to speak on this, because it's close to my heart. I'm speaking not just as a professional, but somebody who's personally deeply committed to the idea that the true purpose of our economy is to serve our well-being as humans, and not the other way around. I believe that we need to see health and well-being in the context of their true, inextricably intertwined determinants that include things like inequality, the climate emergency, as I've said, energy and water distribution, biodiversity loss, conflict and migration. And I want to begin by ensuring that we're all mindful of the context of every local global discussion about well-being. So if I could ask, maybe just close your eyes for a moment and picture a world where our children can breathe clean air, where every one of us, regardless of our backgrounds or circumstances, has access to the opportunities, the supports and the care that we need to thrive. Imagine a society which measures success not by the rise and fall of stock markets, but by the well-being and the happiness of its people. A world where we don't chase after endless economic growth, but instead cultivate the well-being of our communities and the resilience of our planet. And now open your eyes for a moment and reflect on the reality that we do live in today. We're faced with headlines that celebrate GDP growth while our health and social systems crumble under pressure, inequalities widen, and our planet edges closer to ecological collapse. And I'm talking in a global, international context. We prioritize short-term profits over long-term survival. And in so doing, we neglect the very essence of what it means to be truly prosperous. We're trapped in a system that tells us that economic gain for few is worth more than the well-being of the many. And this isn't just a crisis of policy. It's really a crisis of imagination. We've all become so accustomed to this narrow view of how we define progress that we've forgotten what it means to truly thrive. And this is why we're here today, to challenge that narrative and reimagine our futures and demand that our systems serve the planet and each of us as human beings who live in it. We need to advocate, therefore, for a shift in our focus upstream, as has been mentioned, to address the social, economic, environmental, and commercial determinants of both health and well-being, rather than perhaps merely responding to their downstream effects. My own perspective for a moment as CMO, the COVID-19 was a stark illustration of this need. And it's true to say that the virus of SARS-CoV-2 was the immediate cause of the pandemic, and that was the cause of COVID-19. But the underlying factors, like inequalities in socioeconomic status, employment conditions, housing, access to healthcare, these were what determined the vast burden of mortality and morbidity all around the world. These systemic weaknesses make societies more vulnerable not only to health crises, but also to environmental and economic shocks. Addressing these challenges requires a systems approach that recognizes the interconnected nature of these global issues. And this means integrating health into all policies, promoting sustainable practices, and ensuring that health and well-being of people and the planet are central to our decision-making. For decades, we know that GDP has been the most used indicator to measure progress. Yet GDP growth can occur while inequalities deepen, while health and well-being outcomes will worsen, and while economic impact and degradation accelerates. We know it is derived from a model of economic theory that fails to appreciate the true complexity of unbridled economic forces and the devastation that the pursuit of GDP-only growth has wreaked on the planet through policies that steal from the future of the many to bankroll the present of the few. A narrow focus on GDP fails to value the well-being of individuals and societies. GDP, as we know, only measures economic output and not the quality of life. It does not consider the distribution of wealth, environmental impact, or social inequality. And it does not capture the informal economy and things that are so important to us, such as household work, volunteering, caring for our children, caring for older people, etc. Over the past number of decades, we've seen a proliferation of international frameworks and agreements aimed at promoting health, improving well-being, sustainability, and equity. I could mention a number: the Ottawa Charter, the Alma Ata Declaration on Primary Healthcare, the Rio and Paris Agreements on climate change, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and so on. They've laid out ambitious visions for a future which is healthier, perhaps more equitable and more sustainable. But despite these international commitments, we are not making the progress that we should be making. In fact, by many measures, we're moving backwards. We're falling behind on some critical goals, such as reducing inequality, combating the climate emergency, and ensuring good health and well-being. And this implementation gap actually arises often at the country level, where global commitments are not being translated into effective national policies and actions. Governments around the world sign up to international agreements, but perhaps lack the political will to implement the necessary changes. Competing priorities, vested interests, and the fear of political backlash can often result in inaction. Many countries, perhaps low and middle income countries particularly, may lack the financial and technical resources needed to implement global commitments effectively. One Health is a good example of how global frameworks require cross-sectoral collaboration. Yet, as we know and we've said, most governments are organized into silos, leading to a lack of coordination and policies that are sometimes inconsistent and perhaps contradictory. Powerful actors often work against the public interest, and international agreements often lack robust accountability mechanisms. Without clear consequences for non-compliance, countries can, and often do, ignore their commitments, and they fear little by way of consequence. If we're to close this implementation gap, we need a new approach to governance, and one that emphasises accountability, transparency, and genuine partnership that can empower citizens to hold government and leadership to account at whatever level. And we need to strengthen international institutions to enforce these commitments. Again, the pandemic has shown us that our world is fragile, much more so than we would like, and that our systems are not as resilient as we might have believed. But on the positive side, it has shown us the power of collective action, the importance of community, and the value of solidarity. I believe we cannot afford to ignore these lessons. If we're to build resilience in the face of pandemics and health threats, we must address the root causes of health inequalities. And this means tackling the social determinants of health. It means ensuring that health systems are truly accessible to all, regardless of income or location. And it means that recognizing health as not being just the absence of disease, but the presence of conditions that allow individuals and communities to thrive. So for a moment, let me go back in order to go forward and to the story of Healthy Ireland. The Healthy Ireland framework emerged from a period of relative inattention to public health and wellbeing in Ireland. Over the course of the government between 2007 and 2011, there was little emphasis on the critical areas of public health. The government of the day had different priorities. I was Chief Medical Officer from 2008, and I believed that we needed to see a fundamental change and one that would place health and wellbeing at the heart of government thinking and policy. I believe when the new government in 2011 would come into power, we might have a short window and an opportunity, as it were, to capture their hearts and minds to build something that was new and different. The new government took office on the 9th of March 2011. And on the 13th of June 2011, 3 months later, we started with a launch event in reverse, if you like, that brought together the ministers of the day. That was Riley, Minister Shortall, Lynch, and Francis Fitzgerald, who became Minister for Children subsequently, with Susanna Jakob, as many will know, was the Regional Director for Europe of the WHO at the European level at that time, as well as a number of leaders from across public and civil society in Ireland. And the support we received on that day from Susanna on behalf of the WHO and its consistent maintenance from Hans Kluge, her successor, has been critical in convincing our political leaders to get behind this and to stay behind it. And this was not just about optics. It was about creating a moment which would galvanize action and signal to everybody that the era perhaps of public health neglect was at an end. The launch was intended to, and did, energize stakeholders across the country and set the stage for the collaboration to build the vision that would be necessary. But the real work began after the launch, and we set out to develop Healthy Ireland through an inclusive process. For example, we held 4 regional consultations that brought together local authorities, community leaders, health professionals, and public health experts. And the local authorities in particular were not just participants, but they were central enablers to the vision we were seeking to build. The subsequent framework was approved by government at the beginning of 2013 on the clear understanding that health is influenced by far more than what happens within the healthcare system. And while it sets out a broad and ambitious vision, as we know, we have to acknowledge that Ireland hasn't fully realised this vision. Local authorities, despite the critical role in shaping communities, face limitations in the remit and resources compared to other countries, where local governments often wield much more significant authority. I believe we need local authorities to be supported and empowered to take on a more significant role. That requires a shift in our thinking about local governance in Ireland, and that we view local government as the key architect of healthy communities, and that we must see that we need to allocate relatively more responsibility and resources to that level to enable them to tackle the wider determinants of health and well-being. Local authorities can't achieve that on their own, however. Again, through the pandemic, local authorities and the HSE collaborated extremely well with community groups to deliver essential services, to provide social support, to ensure that public health measures were understood and followed. Communities stepped up to support one another in ways that traditional systems could not. Again, through the pandemic, we saw how important data was in guiding public health responses. We also saw that significant gaps in our data systems, particularly when it came to understanding the health of marginalised populations, were significant. And I believe if local authorities are to take on a greater role in shaping health and well-being, they must have access to more robust cross-sectoral data. The Healthy Ireland framework made provision for a community well-being data hub that offered the promise of a solution but has not yet been realised. that was intended to allow local authorities to track the health and well-being of communities across a range of indicators, from housing and employment to physical activity and mental health. And by using data to inform policies, the intention was that local authorities could ensure that resources were targeted to where they might be most needed. In areas of social deprivation, local authorities have an essential role to play in improving housing conditions, creating jobs, and ensuring access to education and healthcare. The current social housing crisis in Ireland highlights the urgent need for local authorities to be empowered to provide more affordable, safe, and healthy housing for all. They must also work with schools, the HSE, and community groups to create holistic approaches that address all aspects of health. But what gives me encouragement now is Ireland's new wellbeing framework, launched in 2021. And it does represent a shift in how the country assesses progress, moving beyond traditional economic measures like GDP to incorporate broader dimensions of quality of life, sustainability, and equality. That framework is centered on 11 key dimensions, such as mental and physical health, income and wealth, housing, environment, and community connections. It aims to provide a holistic view of how Irish society is performing by measuring not just economic success, but also social and environmental factors, as I've said. In my view, the term well-being is particularly effective for us to use in this context because it really does resonate across all sectors, yet no one sector owns it. In my time leading the Healthy Ireland framework, I encountered challenges genuinely when trying to engage non-health sector actors, because the term health, especially when it was used by someone like me, who was visibly the doctor from the Department of Health, caused the unconscious bias of potential collaborators to invoke images of hospitals, drugs, and trolleys, the things they thought I might be interested in. That made it harder for me and my colleagues in the Department of Health to influence those outside of the health sector to see their relevance to public health and well-being. Another significant structural barrier was that the Department of Health, as the line department responsible for Healthy Ireland, lacked the authority to fully convene cross-sectoral action as effectively as central government departments can. And that is why the Wellbeing Framework, which is now led by the Department of the Taoiseach and central governments like the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, is so important. It levels potentially the playing field for upstream determinants of health, such as education, housing, and environment, and encourages all sectors to engage. By embedding this framework into the budgetary process and cross-government policy, it can ensure potentially a comprehensive approach to improving quality of life for all of our citizens. And importantly, it does focus on sustainability and equality, recognizing that not everybody benefits from the progress we've seen in society, and it aiming therefore to address disparities in issues like housing and income. So where does One Health fit into all of this? One Health recognizes the interconnectedness of human, animal, plant, and planetary health. At the global level, the quadripartite on One Health is a collective partnership between the World Health Organization, the Food and Agriculture Organization, the World Organization for Animal Health, and the United Nations Environmental Programme, who work together to promote the One Health approach, addressing the interconnections between human, animal, plant, and environmental health. I and my colleagues in UCD believe that it's vital for One Health to be seen as an approach to global and local problem solving on a range of issues, which is horizontal in its perspective. The research questions it poses, the educational offerings that it develops, and the collaborations that it seeks to develop, rather than solely seeking to deepen vertical expertise, research, and education in more traditional areas, such as antimicrobial resistance and zoonotic illness, important as they are. I fear that standard approaches to planning and to metrics of impact will tend to favour the vertical over the horizontal. In my view, One Health is less a new discipline and more a way of how we align our thinking from siloed disciplines in which we inhabit, which we live, and where we're open to wider definitions of interdisciplinary engagement. And this implies developing knowledge and competency in things like governance, in law, communications, team working, literacy, agency, risk analysis. I could go on. All of these require new collaborations of the kind this morning provides for, and we've heard already, and which are common to how we respond to the range of global challenges that we must face. Traditional incentives and rewards in the world of academia tend to encourage silo thinking. And if the One Health approach is to be real, then it's about making progress on unlocking silos to find common solutions to interrelated global, what some people call grand challenges. As I've said earlier, the implementation gap arises at city, local, and community level. If we're serious about reducing health inequalities and improving public health, we need to expand the role of local authorities and adopt a One Health approach. I believe that local authorities are uniquely positioned to implement One Health principles at the community level. For example, by promoting urban biodiversity, they can create green spaces that support human, plant, and environmental health. Green spaces then not only improve mental health, but encourage physical activity and play a crucial role in preserving biodiversity and mitigating the potential effects and the existing effects of climate change. In urban planning, local authorities have the power to create environments that encourage active travel. We've heard about walking and cycling by investing in pedestrian-friendly infrastructure and public transport. Fostering One Health literacy and agency within communities is also essential to bridging the gap between global framework agreements and meaningful local action. So we need to grow public understanding of the interconnectedness between human, animal, plant, and environmental health by empowering those communities to take ownership of the solutions that are needed to tackle these challenges. Such local empowerment can ensure that the principles outlined in the high-level global charters and agreements about which I spoke are translated into practical impact on the ground. Developing One Health literacy can help individuals and populations to understand their role in safeguarding collective health, while promoting agency, which can allow them to apply that knowledge in their everyday lives. This combination can strengthen community resilience and ensure that actions are taken at the local level in a way that's aligned with global health goals. It is through that kind of grassroots engagement that the implementation gap can be effectively closed, ensuring that health policies are not just theoretical aspirations, but practical realities on the ground. But in my view, the One Health approach, the view has been at times too narrow and fragmented, focusing, as I've said, on zoonotic and antimicrobial diseases, while neglecting other critical components of health, such as plant health. Plants being the foundation of our ecosystems and our food systems. They provide our oxygen for the air that we breathe, the food that we eat, the raw materials for countless products. Yet their health is threatened by climate change, pollution, invasive species, and sustainable agricultural practices. When plant health is compromised, it has, and we know this back to the 1840s in Ireland, it has cascading effects on human health, food security, and environmental sustainability. The newly established One Health Centre at UCD is committed to fostering systems thinking. As its director, I want to expand the scope of One Health beyond traditional disciplinary boundaries of human and animal biology to integrate insights from social sciences, law, behavioral economics, the humanities, and more. Our goal is to create a truly interdisciplinary framework that addresses the complex global challenges we face, from climate emergency to biodiversity loss to food security and health inequalities. The Centre is poised to become the first WHO collaborating centre on One Health, a designation that underscores our role as a leader in this field potentially. And we're actively engaging with our global partners to influence policy and practice at the highest level. But we cannot do this alone. Implementation and change happens at the local level, and we need your support, your expertise, and your partnership. What I've heard this morning really reinforces my view on this. And so I invite everybody who's here today to join us on this journey, to visit our website, to become a member. Our membership is open to everybody, and to be a part of the collaborative effort to shape the future of Ireland's health. I'd love to hear from you personally. My email address you'll have, tony.houlihan@ucd.ie. Invite us to your meetings and your council chambers, and together we can build a centre that not only leads in research and policy, but serves as a model of collaboration and innovation for the Irish and the international community. As we move forward, both the National Wellbeing Framework that I've mentioned and a One Health approach are consistent with each other, but also essential in shaping the future that we all want to see. We have the knowledge, the tools, and the resources to build a healthier, fairer, and more sustainable world focused on well-being. What we need now is the will to act. And so I urge each of you to align with these efforts, to champion the wellbeing framework in your local authorities, and to engage with the One Health vision. Together, we can close the gap between policy and practice, between global frameworks and local action. And we can ensure that the decisions we make today will lead to a healthier, more equitable, and more sustainable world for future generations. Thank you.
Tony, I'd love to have kept you on for another 2 hours. So thanks very much for your really, really great input, and just personally, thanks for everything that you've done for public health in Ireland. That was great because it was a sense of reality therapy for all of us. Really enjoyed your input, particularly how you presented the important elements of developing a common understanding of One Health. your concentration on context, and I really was impressed with quality of life, inequalities, well-being economy, how you weave that into the conversation, because it is so much, so important. And just, there was one word that's really struck a chord with me, and that was resilience. You mentioned it time and time again. So I think it's really important from a community perspective, really important that we have structures within local government that have the ability to, with community resilience in particular, to be able to have a bottom-up approach in developing community resilience. That's the public participation networks. So I'd really maybe urge you to make contact with those nationally and across the 31 local authorities, because they are those ambassadors that will be able to generate the One Health message across, and be an ally for you. And just finally, just I suppose you mentioned about a data hub. So everything you mentioned was just what we've been thinking within Health Ireland local government for the last 2.5 bit years. So we have a data hub that's nearing completion before the end of the year. We'd like to present that in front of the Department of An Taoiseach. I think it would be great for yourself and colleagues to have view of that, so we could see how it could be improved. But it actually gives the level of disaggregation of data that's required for us to inform the decision making that we need to, based on your input, Catherine's, Lorraine's, and Niall's. So I'd like to continue in the same vein, but with a European context, and I'm really delighted that Ciara Fortune, who's a really good friend to local government in Ireland, has taken time out of her really busy schedule and agenda to join us. So Ciara has extensive experience of global partnerships, having worked across many of the WHO regions. And I'm particularly interested in hearing Ciara's opinion on encouraging leadership within local government, and particularly with regard to One Health. So Ciara, thanks for joining us, and we'd love to hear your presentation, so you can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Vinny, and thank you for that very kind introduction, and good morning to all of you colleagues. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be participating in this really, really important conversation this morning, and it's always a challenge speaking just after Professor Tony Holohan, who is also a dear friend and a dear colleague. But Tony, you've really set the scene very eloquently for me to continue, because what I'm going to do, colleagues, over the next 10 minutes is that I am going to speak to the work that we do as a Healthy Cities Network in applying a One Health approach. And what I'm going to do over the next 10 minutes is that I will firstly I will set the scene. Secondly, I will speak to the work that we do and really show then thirdly how cities are very strategically positioned to implement the One Health agenda. And let me just get my screen up here and make sure that can you see my screen okay?
We can. Ciara, if you just want to put it into presentation mode for us, please.
I will indeed. And for some reason, let me just...
If you want to come to the bottom, Ciara, where there's the plus and minus sign, beside the minus, there's like a little projector screen. So bring your arrow right down.
Right
Yeah,
here.
and if you click that, please.
There you go.
Thank you, Ciara.
Excellent. So, colleagues, I would like to start off where on one of the key points that Tony he touched upon. And whilst we are talking about the future of One Health, I'd like to go back to the past for a moment. And I'd like to go back to 2015 to be precise. 2015, as you know, was a very historic year. It was historic in the sense that the global community adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, and it was also the year where the Millennium Development Goals were concluded. It was an opportunity to take stock of the progress that we've made, and I think it's fair to say that much progress was made, and we had much to celebrate. We saw a decrease in extreme poverty, an increase in life expectancy, and a decrease in under 5 mortality. But at the same time, there was a recognition that not everybody had benefited equally from that progress. And in fact, equity and poverty continue to be two of the biggest challenges of this very century. Now, we know that inequalities do not exist just between countries, they also exist within countries. And I always like to put this map up here, which is the metro map or the tube map from Washington, D.C. I lived there for 10 years and I used to commute into the office on the red line that's highlighted here. And you will see that just within 17 metro stops, there was a difference in life expectancy of that of 9 years. So in other words, place matters, and that is also precisely why local government is so essential in really addressing those challenges at the local level. Now, if we zoom in closer to the European region, we have some very specific challenges. 2/3 of the population live in urban environment. 14 million Europeans die prematurely each year due to polluted environments. And in high-income countries, 1 child in 5 lives in poverty. And this is just to highlight some of the key challenges that we face in this region. We often say we are living through a perma-crisis, so we are facing multiple crises at the same time, including that of climate change, social unrest, as well as that of pandemics. Now, to tackle those challenges here in the European region at the WHO, we put together the European Programme of Work. That's a 5-year plan. Central to that plan is to, again, tackle these challenges that I have just highlighted, but central to that plan is to really ensure that we leave no one behind. Having said that, that plan was drafted in close consultation with our member states pre-COVID. And this leads me to speak to today's subject matter, which is that of One Health, because in 2020, our regional director, he put together what he refers to as a Monti Commission. This was a commission that consisted of 18 scientific experts that was tasked to really look at health and social policy in the light of COVID. And in 2021, they launched their report. And a key recommendation that emerged from that report was that there was a need to truly operationalize One Health. Because what they argued was that if we were to really truly operationalize One Health, we would be able to reduce AMR, prevent and control zoonotic diseases, promote global health security, improve the environment, and also protect biodiversity and conservation. Now, as we heard earlier from Professor Holohan, is that One Health is not a new approach. It's not a new concept. It has been around for a long time, but we have had to redefine it, taking into account the context of the 21st century. And as such, what's really essential to this is that we cannot address these issues in silos. There's no one sector that can address these challenges. It really requires a number of sectors coming together and addressing these different challenges that we have in planetary health, in human health, and in animal health, but address those challenges in an integrated manner. So I think it's fair to say that since the Monti Commission launched its report, we have made much progress. We established the Technical Advisory Group back in 2022. That group came together to, again, provide very concrete guidance as to what does it mean to operationalize a One Health approach. They have since come out with their recommendations, and they have identified 6 lines of actions that they're recommended that we should really address. This includes addressing inequalities. It includes addressing governance, data and evidence, prevention, sustainable financing, as well as that of the workforce. We've put that into a very specific guide, a sort of a regional adaptation guide. This will be launched during our regional committee this year. And what that guide does is that it provides very concrete ways of, again, addressing and implementing a One Health approach, but it also provides very concrete ways of doing it, concrete examples, the how-tos, if you like. And in that guide, you will also find reference to examples of how to do that, not just at the global level, at the regional level, at the national level, but also at the local level. And I'll speak to that a little later. We're also very excited that we will be launching our very first regional collaborating center on One Health. This will indeed be directed by Professor Tony Holohan and his team. And again, this is a very, very unique opportunity because, again, we've just heard Tony what his vision is to do that. But again, it's an opportunity to really build capacity, to ensure that these 6 lines of actions that have been put out there are translated into practice through the One Health Collaborating Center. Now, the Healthy Cities Network is a network that has been around for more than 35 years. It was established 35 years ago, really with a vision to putting the Ottawa Charter on Health Promotion into the streets of the people. At that time, the sort of idea that health happens outside of the health system, that it happens in the environment where we live, love, and work, and I'm also being told where we Google nowadays, was a very novel idea. And at that time, 11 cities took it upon themselves to, again, address some of these different challenges that they were living through by using by really tackling and addressing the social, economic, and environmental determinants of health. Fast forward 35 years, we now have more than 81 flagship cities. We work through 22 national networks, and we estimate that we impact the lives of 235 million people. Central to the work that we do is that, and I believe that the reason why the network has been around for so long is that it has really honed in on a political component, on a technical component, and on a community component. Now, every year we come together as a network. All of our members come together. This is an opportunity to take stock of the progress that we have made, but it's also an opportunity to really address issues that are very pertinent and very relevant to the work that the cities they do. In 2022, the cities came together and they prioritized One Health and in close consultation with members, with stakeholders, and with the community, they put together a political statement on One Health that entailed 10 actionable recommendations. And if you look here, you will see that those recommendations were categorized under 4 categories, namely that of prevention, promotion, preparation, and transformation. And since then, our cities have been hard at work implementing this political statement. And I'm just showcasing one example here. This is just one city really, again, addressing One Health through the Toga Community Garden, where there is a real focus on community engagement, as well as really promoting sustainable food systems. And this is just one example of many in the region. And I think what is really characteristic of this is, 1, it's the engagement with the community. 2, it's that ability to work across sectors and again, bringing different sectors together. And 3, a lot of the sort of factors that fall under One Health really falls under the domain of local government, and they're therefore very strategically positioned to, again, apply this approach in the work that they do. So colleagues, this was a little bit of a snapshot of what we do as a Healthy Cities network. And really what I wanted to stress was that community well-being really is very much interconnected with human, animal, and environmental health. Local context is key to addressing these challenges effectively. And local government play a pivotal role in really aligning health interventions across sectors. And through the Healthy Cities framework, cities can champion the One Health approach by really fostering cross-sector partnerships by addressing the wider determinants of health. I'm a firm believer that together we can break down these silos and align human, animal, and environmental health for the well-being for all. And I'm excited that we are really building these partnerships across the three levels. And we are super excited to see that we will have the opportunity to build the evidence, to build the capacity in a very systematic manner together with Tony and his colleagues as part of the Collaborating Centre that will be about to be launched in 2 weeks' time during our regional committee, our 74th regional committee here in the European region. And with that, Vinny, I'd like to thank you for your attention and to you colleagues for listening to this somewhat rapid overview of what it is that we do to really address the One Health. It's a pleasure and I look forward to further discussions.
Thank you so much, Ciara. And I think your snapshot only gives a tiny indication of the nature of your work. I'm delighted that you made reference to the Healthy Cities approach, and it was great to see the work of Healthy Cities, Cork Healthy Cities highlighted. You had recently visited Ireland and our cohort of Healthy Ireland and Sláintecare local development officers, where you gave a similar positive message in relation to what European Healthy Cities context is. Yeah, so the Irish National Network, just to give a bit of context here, is looking to seek accreditation to WHO for phase 7, and similarly there'll be 4 cities that would be following their counterparts in Cork looking for WHO accreditation. So even the content of all of the contributors today has provided strong affirmation for the work that's being done by Healthy Ireland city and county coordinators and by the local development officers within Sláintecare Healthy Communities. And it gives, I suppose, a good level of guidance and direction in our efforts. So, Ciara, thank you so much for your contribution. And that means we're at the end of our presentations from the contributors, who now morph into panelists to discuss and answer some of your questions raised under Q&A. So I'd welcome back all our panelists, and I'm glad to see Catherine might be still with us. She might, yeah, great. So can I just begin maybe with a question, and collectively, thank you for all your contributions. They've been really, really, really positive, thought-provoking, and a sense of reality as well for all of us. So can I begin with just for each of you to respond, and I might start with Niall in the order that we contributed in the presentations. If we were trying to move to more enabling approaches, what one thing do you think is most important from your perspective to enable this to happen?
Certainly, from my point of view, Vinny, I suppose breaking down some of the silos and making the better connections between the disciplines and the professions and so on, and different pillars in society is absolutely critical. I've learned so much listening in to the conversation earlier on today, talking about the One Health initiative, the wellness index, things that certainly I would have been maybe partially aware of, but not necessarily fully in the context of how it influences my work. So I think, for activities that, indeed going back to what Catherine was saying as well, build the system awareness is absolutely crucial.
Okay, Lorraine?
Now, the thing that struck me is something that I struggle with myself, and that is resourcing the horizontal. because, you know, and Tony mentioned it as well, that we, as academics, we give a lot of weight to, you know, people who publish a lot of papers on a certain thing, you know, and, you know, that while with the Impact 2030, there is evolution happening in that space, it's still really difficult to make a case for an investment in a position where the person's main role is across cross-disciplinary connections, because, you know, you don't deliver as much. What you might deliver is more impactful, but the outputs don't, you know, on paper look as, you know, as productive. And, you know, kind of on reflection, that what I feel like for the last 13 years is that I'm the health person in the transport room, or I'm the transport person in the planning room, or, and, you know, that we don't always give, you know, enough, you know, emphasis and support to people who are, you know, kind of working in that space. And I've just been really lucky within my university that they recognize that. But I think there's an opportunity for us to empower more people to be cross-disciplinary and to resource that, particularly within the local authority structures.
Thank you, Lorraine. Catherine? You're on mute, I think. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Building on what Niall and Lorraine said, I think both of that is value, and adding to that is, I think that what gets measured gets done. So we need new and innovative ways of measuring and documenting progress in cross-sector collaboration, and providing mechanisms through which, be it a county, be it a regional area or a country, can actually have a pathway to achieve and deliver on cross-sectional impact. And have a clear vision, because when you have a planner explaining to someone in education, and someone in education explaining to health, and someone in health explaining to transport why they are there with different agendas, but actually all promoting one common goal, then you're home.
Great. Thank you very much, Catherine. Tony?
Thanks, Vinny. I think if I was to pick one thing in addition to the things that I've heard, with which I agree, it might be at the level of the community and the individual, building literacy and agency on the part of those populations. People don't live in silos. We've invented silos through administration. We don't, in our daily worlds, define our well-being as being about health or being about housing. Or we're holistic in the way we define these things for ourselves. And somehow or another, you know, we've got to work with that concept. My own learning from the course of the pandemic and the role that I played is the thing that played the key difference. If you think, just look at a European level between the different experiences of different countries, and there were quite different outcomes. We had access to much the same science, much the same data, much the same countermeasures at, broadly speaking, the same times, but the different experiences were about the extent to which populations were engaged through the various different mechanisms that we had in place, and the communities were empowered and informed to buy into. And that was a key lesson for me. So finding ways that we can, and in my context in the university, will be about the research and evidence base for that, and the teaching methodologies in relation to all of those kinds of things, but how we can build better, more effective One Health literacy and agency into our population.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. And Ciara?
Yes, perhaps also to echo my colleagues. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, I have the privilege of coordinating the Healthy Cities Network. We have a wealth of knowledge, and we see on a daily basis what cities are doing, what local governments are doing. I mean, they're very agile, so they are really sort of again moving the agendas at a rapid speed. And I think One Health is a good example of that. And so is the wellbeing economy. And Tony and myself had the opportunity to be here a couple of years ago when when an agreement was made between government officials that they were very committed to the wellbeing economy. And what we are seeing now is that our cities, they're really moving that agenda. They are, again, they are piloting this approach. They're putting together agreements between them to ensure that this is an approach that's really applied. So I think my message here is, I mean, I think we need to look a little closer to home and really draw upon the expertise that we already have. What I'm seeing is that local government, they have this deep knowledge of their communities, of the lived realities of the communities. They have deep knowledge of working across sectors. And we need to be better at documenting that and making sure that we disseminate that information. And we take great pride in doing that. Vinny, you spoke about the data hub you're developing. We are doing the same thing because, our greatest pride is to make sure that we spotlight all the work that's being done so others, they can learn from that. And that's so it's not just about trickling down, but it's also about trickling upwards, because I think there is so much that can be learned from local government.
Thanks, Ciara. And I suppose that leads on to, the next query, and I don't mind who jumps in here in relation to responding to it. So in the skill sets that, look at the theme of today's webinar. So enabling wellbeing environments within local government and encouraging local government leadership. Your views on the skill sets needed within all of those local government initiatives that we might have highlighted earlier. So there is a really, really large number of different structured initiatives, climate action, integration teams, people that are being resourced through departments for regeneration funding. So is it systems thinkers with good leadership, stroke soft skills, or do we have a domain of those specific technical experts that we need to have within local government? Your view, and I don't mind who comes in here first. Don't all come in at once.
I'm happy to come in at this, Vinny. This is something that we were very conscious of when we developed our transportation planning masters in TU Dublin, and we started in the end of 2019 or 2018. And it was that recognition of the multi-players that needed to be in the room. And we specifically left it open to anybody, from any discipline, once they had an interest in transport, could come into it. And I always use the example of that, I remember speaking to two engineers separately who were coming on the course, and they said to us that they didn't think the placemaking module or the behavior change module were of relevance to them. And at the end of the program, they said that they were the most beneficial. And so sometimes we don't know what the things that we need to know are, and again, it comes from our own perspectives and biases. But there's a really important education piece. Now, we are limited in our undergraduate engineering programs on how we can integrate those topics in because of our Engineers Ireland accreditation. And this is right across the board when it comes to, accredited courses. So we need better kind of connections and governance at that higher level around those organizations, and we need to think about how do we embed those different perspectives and the need for that knowledge across the sectors, because those people who have done those courses become the champions within their local authorities, within their organizations.
Okay. Anyone else want to contribute before I have a couple of different questions specifically for some of you, but anyone else want to contribute to that?
So perhaps if I could just add to Lorraine's point, I had the great privilege many years ago to be participating in the Health and All Policies, one of the first training courses that was done in South Australia. And they actually invited colleagues from the different government sectors, and they made exactly the same point that you made, Lorraine. So I think to your point, I think what's really important is that we also, it is very much about developing those soft skills, but it's also about learning other sectors' language, being willing to listen as well, and being willing to sometimes, put a different sets of glasses on and understand that things are perhaps done differently, talk differently, and be willing to learn those languages. In fact, one of the coordinators during this particular course said that, she'd never drunk so much coffee in her life, because and she joked, but she was very serious. She said it's actually, this is actually the secret to, being able to reach out, being willing to listen, learn, and learn others' languages, and so just to complement that.
Thanks, Ciara. So Catherine, a question specifically for you. Is there a magic ingredient based from your input, and particularly if you could pull in some of the concepts that your contributors would have provided? Is there a magic ingredient? And if yes, what would you say is the best buy for encouraging local government leadership?
Okay, Well, I think there's no silver bullet. That's the one thing. But there are plenty of magic ingredients. I think you've heard about relationship building, really, really key. Trust, a sense of trust. Common terminology, very, very important. But equally, I think the use of, for me, it's about policy, because policy generates the enabling context within which the programs and the environmental changes that we want to make to where we live are, they're tendered, they're developed, they're implemented, and they're evaluated. And without that policy context, and without it being enabling and long term, that really does put us on a back foot. So I think if we can influence the policy decision making, and we've heard, I think it was Kira that was speaking to this, we've plenty of good policies out there. The problem is they're not implemented. So if we can, in a systematic way, evaluate the extent or the status of implementation of good quality policies, public health policies to address health and well-being population level, then I believe One Health will really flourish.
Thank you, Catherine. And I suppose it leads nicely into a question maybe for Niall and Tony. And it comes from a contributor in the audience from the RCSI. So health is the one area that sits outside the local authority, even though we'd like to think differently, but we're in the wellbeing space. I'd agree with what Tony would have indicated earlier. But that actually is a major issue and stifles so much positive health promotion, preventative approaches. So how can that be addressed to ensure public health and local authorities work really effectively together?
You want me to come in on that, Vinny?
Yeah, Niall.
Yeah, just I suppose maybe by telling a story in a maybe a related area. When I came through planning school in UCD in the 1980s, things like biodiversity, climate change weren't part of the vocabulary of the planning system, remarkably when we think about it. Habitats directives, climate action, I suppose the whole global and local action around that has changed all of that. Now biodiversity and climate action is a byword for, I suppose, what many different strands of the planning process work with every day. We have new, indeed, technical disciplines and professions and so on that are now working, as part of the system. So, going back to my first slide, in the presentation, I suppose much of what we know of our planning process now originally came from health, and I suppose the understanding that connection between health and wellness and so on. So maybe we need to rediscover that, more by building these connections. I suppose maybe where we need to as well, developing further technical or specialist knowledge and capability within the process and that. But I think a good starting point, is events or our events like today's and others. Indeed, I have a few emails to send after this session today, just in terms of making some of those connections. The other piece, and I would say this because I'm a regulator, and sort of kind of globally unique in the context of a planning regulator, which may speak to some of our history in this country. But I think unless you have good oversight mechanisms as well, from a governance and from an implementation point of view, they're crucial. So much of what we do today, in terms of our work, is holding the local government system to account in relation to the policies and so on that it is already signed up to in relation to active travel, climate, and so on and so forth. So a little bit of stick now and again does help.
Thank you. Tony?
Yeah, maybe just a couple of reflections, and it's a good question. There isn't an easy answer to it, but I think it's not just obviously just about health and the local authority system. It's about the whole of public administration, civil society, and how it all comes together. We talked briefly, and I won't go into the detail, about data, for example. We have structural impediments to conversations that should be happening between local health providers and local authorities because they've got different geographic responsibilities. They organize themselves differently, so there's no incentive or rationale for them to discuss when they don't look after similar populations. And so those kinds of structural impediments are things that we need to be thinking about tackling. But to my mind, it comes back to sort of building values. And I go back, I told the story briefly about the Healthy Ireland and its development experience. And one of the consultations that happened at the time happened in South Dublin County Council. You remember Joe Horan was the city manager or county manager in that area. And I remember him making the point, and it really impacted me. And I've told the story many times since. He talked about the fact that that particular local authority had the largest population of travellers in the country of any other local authority his informal performance measure for the impact of the work that they did was the percentage of traveller children who completed Leaving Cert education. Now, there's nobody who would conceivably say that it was his responsibility or hold him to account for that kind of responsibility and framing his responsibility in those terms. But we all understand what he was doing in that, and kind of saying it's the relationship between, being able to have places and environments and so on in which study and all of that can happen, and people to be properly nourished and all of that good stuff. And so it's about framing a sort of set of values where we see our jobs as not being accountable for the things that are in our job descriptions, but responsible for all of the things that we can influence from wherever we might sit.
Thank you, Tony. And Lorraine, just a question, I suppose, in regards to the key innovation area so you're involved within your everyday job in relation to innovation and being a lead in relation to that for TU Dublin. So what key innovation area do you see that relates to what you've heard today that you feel we all should be aware of, or even if you were trying to tell us what to do, what we should be doing as an innovator?
Yeah, and I suppose at the moment everything is quite fragmented in the innovation space, I think, and I think where we can bring things together and pull things together, that's where I see the greatest value. So we're looking at a digital twin process as part of our living lab that some local authorities are already doing, but they're a great way potentials from that data at a geographical context which people can relate to. But interestingly, within their sustainability office, other phone calls that I frequently have to make is the fact that our reporting structures as a public sector body in relation to our emissions are different, for the SCAI than what we have to report to the NTA in relation to transport. We have to go and we have to figure out what's the metric that's needed and how do we collect that. So actually, if there was more collaboration at a national level to kind of to relate to that digital twin structures, or and I hope I'm not stealing someone's thunder because he really wants to research on this. So don't steal it. Come back to us if you want to talk to it. But conversations around digital triplets, where we collect qualitative information as well that we capture as part of, when we're building those twins, because it's really important that we get both the quantitative and the qualitative information, particularly around our spaces and how people feel in those spaces. So yeah, that's for me is kind of a top-down, like a top-level conversation around what is the data, how do we collect it in an efficient way so the systems can talk to each other, and then how do we deliver on that at a local authority level, and how do we get communities to be able to engage in that for their own actions.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. I'm just maybe putting in an expression of interest there in relation to digital triplets. So it very much feeds into the work that we're doing with Place Standard and trying to have an Irish version of Place Standard and its many different versions as a result of working with Ciara in the WHO Health Inequalities and Placemaking working group. So, and I think that would be music to Niall's ears as well in relation to having qualitative data. And if we can do that and use it within our hub as well, as in providing qualitative data that can be mapped in relation to how people feel about their areas, we're starting to get really, really good information, as Tony would have indicated earlier. Ciara, a question for you and maybe Tony as well, just in relation to, you mentioned about the One Health adaptation guide. So what role do you see for local government in implementing this guide? Wouldn't mind your views. And even the health literacy, how can we build health literacy within the country? And just before you answered, we're doing a typical Irish thing, Ciara. So we said we'd finish at 12 o'clock, but it's obviously 2 minutes past 12. So it's a bit like closing time in a rural pub. We're going to try and maybe spend another few minutes on this. So
That's no
if you don't
problem
mind.
at all, Vinny. So yes, as I said, we are very excited to be launching this adaptation guide, and I really see a key role for local government in implementing this. primarily because there is a specific line of action in there which really speaks to addressing health inequalities. We know that one health approach can only be successful if it's inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. And as I said earlier, we have so much evidence, so much knowledge, so much expertise within local government. We are documenting that. So in that sense, I really see a role for local government, precisely because they have that deep knowledge of the communities that they work with. And again, if we are to be successful, we need to engage with the community. So plenty of opportunity there, and we look forward to, again, working with local government, working with the Healthy Cities Network to make that a reality.
Thanks, Ciara. Tony, just any comment on that?
Yeah, and if I just add to that, what we might, and just be slightly parochial in the context of the centre that we're seeking to establish, looking to try and build out the evidence base, the tools and the methodologies, the sharing of the information about what works, and the building of stories and so on, and creation of that knowledge and making it available to people who might be able to work with the implementation of that knowledge. We need to strengthen our evidence base around implementation. We talk about the vertical and the horizontal and how we value them. When it comes to research funding, when it comes to educational offerings, it's so much easier to make the case for, if you like, broadening out our vertical expertises. But we need to turn these questions around implementation sciences, and in this case, the question around literacy and agency, into research questions that we build an evidence base for, and that we work on methods to share that information right around the world. Because ultimately, all implementation happens at the local level. So that's where the focus has to be.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So final question is with regards to Sustainable Development Goals. And again, I'm conscious of time, so whoever wants to maybe just provide an input. So we saw them stitched into some of your presentations. And it's a bit like the nature of the question I'm asking. Are we missing a trick in not making the SDGs the backbone of all our activity? Many of you might say it is, but for a lot of the local government activity in particular, they're like the SDGs are so intertwined and have well-being embedded within them. Why are we attempting to achieve the SDGs as an add-on for a lot of activity? And maybe does it facilitate that kind of linear or transactional approach by different sections within an agency or different agencies as a result of it being not the backbone of what we do? Your views, and you can totally disagree with me. That's good.
Okay, I'll make one point on that. I actually think that they're a great enabler for local authorities to identify cross-sectoral collaborations, because each of us individually are quite good at mapping onto the SDGs what we think we're doing and how we think we're addressing things. And so then if someone takes a step back and looks across the local authority and going, who's addressing SDG 5? And kind of link those people up. I think they make a great tool at that level for just identifying collaborations and potential to work together.
Okay, thanks, Lorraine. If I could, so maybe think we're nearing the end of the webinar event, I'd like to sincerely thank our contributors and panelists, Niall, Lorraine, Catherine, Tony, and Ciara. I do know, believe me, how difficult it is to get hold of each of you individually, so more than delighted to have convened you together today. And I think it actually might set the platform for maybe further discussions and working and having conversations with yourselves. I've thoroughly enjoyed this webinar. I hope those in attendance have too. I'd like to acknowledge IMS Connect, who managed operations today so well, and also to thank my colleague Dave Mitchell in the National Office for his support. Finally, I'd like to thank you for attending. I think we had over 370 registered for the event, and at one stage this morning we had over 200 in attendance. So that actually is affirmation of that this is an area that is of significant interest, and the chaos and disorder that Lorraine mentioned is probably relevant, and it's something that we need to address. So, and I think today is, as Niall would have indicated, today is the start of maybe some conversations that we might have. I hope it's been a learning experience for all of you. It has been for me. In that regard, could I just ask you complete the feedback form that will pop up on your screens in a few minutes or moments? I think your feedback will be very much helpful for us. It'll shape the type of future events that we might have that might be relevant to your individual work as you're within the wellbeing space. And also just to remember that our final and third webinar of 2024 is on Monday, November the 18th at 10 a.m. as well. And that's very much focused on preventative approaches and early interventions. So there's a bit of progression from some of the discussions we've been having earlier on today. So thanks, everyone. Really thank all the contributors, and I am going to be closing the webinar event now. So, Garamila Magav, Agus Slán Liv Galer.